This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Ben Smallbone. So Ben is a film director, producer, and editor. He actually directed a 2022 documentary about the faith of Johnny Cash. Again, yes, if you've listened to my show for any length of time, you know how important Johnny Cash is to me. And that is called Johnny Cash, The Redemption of an American Icon. And also, he is the director of a new film and series with Angel Studios called Homestead, which, guys, if you were listening to this on time, it is coming out in theaters this weekend. So December the 20th, 2024, that is this weekend, folks. You can go out there and get your tickets for this. But in this particular interview, we just get right into the Johnny Cash question. Why is he interested in Johnny Cash? Why did he get, or how did he become part of this project? Why were they exploring the faith and the redemptive element, specifically as it pertains to the Christian faith of Johnny Cash? And so anytime I get to talk about Johnny Cash, I get to have a good time with that. So we did that. But then also we move on to Homestead. So perhaps you've seen some advertisements for this series, but this is a film. It's a 2-hour film, so think of it like a long pilot, and then we get into a series. And what this is going to be is it's basically an end-of-the-world scenario, and you have this group of people that have actually prepared for this scenario, and then there's the haves and the have-nots, and you have all these different types of characters, the super intense characters that don't have compassion, but then also the compassionate characters that are kind of dunderheaded and don't make good survivalist decisions. But this is a series and a film that looks at our reliance on technology and how we kind of worship at the altar of the convenience that technology gives us. But also we look at the line and the ever-blurring line between being prepared and being paranoid. And as people of faith, how do we wrestle with that? And then we kind of talked about the different types of characters and why certain faith content feels so forced and corny, and how does it end up that way, and why is Homestead a little bit different. But man, we didn't have a whole lot of time today because he literally had a red carpet event to go to right after we got done with our interview. But I was just so glad that we snuck this interview in here for you guys. So guys, I'm not going to keep him from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Ben Smallbone, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Hey, Kyle. Thanks for having me on, man.
It's good having you on. Now, I got to tell you right from the beginning, I normally like to weed in, kind of go in kind of slow and be like, well, how'd you get into filmmaking and what was it like growing up, you and all that? But I'm going to skip all that garbage for today because you actually made a film about one of my favorite humans to have ever walked this earth, and that's the one and only Johnny Cash. When people ask me, why do I wear all black whenever I present in person? Part of it is so you can't see me sweat just in case that's happening, and I don't want to have to think about what I'm wearing, but also because I grew up being a huge Johnny Cash guy. Like, I remember listening to Johnny Cash in like middle school and high school. Like, I was all about it, including the old stuff, not just the American recordings. So let's start there. Yes, you make films. Yes, you got in the film industry. That's great, Ben. But let's start with Johnny Cash, The Redemption of an American Icon. How in the world did you get affiliated with that project? And tell us about it.
Well, first of all, I am heading to a premiere for Homestead right after we get done here. And I'm literally wearing all black.
Same.
I got a black coat in the back.
Let's go.
And people ask me all the time why. Many of the same reasons as you, but ultimately a big credit to the man himself, Johnny Cash. And gosh, the journey to making Johnny Cash, one, I'm impressed you saw it. It felt like half of America didn't see it. Actually, a majority of Americans didn't see it. It's a funny thing releasing a documentary into theaters, right? Who pays money to go watch a 2-hour documentary in a theater? But anyways, that's beside the subject. I am a big fan of Johnny and big fan of redemption. And so we were doing a series with the Owen brothers. They have a company called Kingdom Story Company. I worked with those guys since they made I Can Only Imagine 7 years ago. And their main responsibility for me was speaking into all of their films and editing on a lot of their films, but also directing and editing their documentaries. And so I did multiple documentaries with them, starting with Steve McQueen, an American icon.
Yeah.
Steve McQueen was an actor, big actor in the 60s and 70s, tragically passed away from cancer in the 80s. But right before he died, he had an incredible redemption story. And we tell that story in the movie. And it was wildly successful. A lot of people came out and saw it and were like, hey, we should make this a series. And so the original intention was for this to be a series of all of the American icons and kind of their faith story or their redemption story, if you will. And the next one right after that was Johnny Cash. And it was a pretty amazing project. It started and stopped over a 3-year period of time, multiple times. And then we started rushing it because this is kind of morbid, but all of Johnny Cash's family and friends started dying because they're all in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so we're like, hey, we're literally going to miss this story if we don't hightail it. And we started rushing all over the country, filming all of these amazing interviews with many, many people to tell the Johnny Cash redemption story. And I'm going to be honest with you, I wasn't initially super aware of his story. I was a fan of him. I was a fan of his music. I was a fan of his American recordings. But when I dove in and started researching this man and seeing how loud he was about his faith the last decade of his life, you instantly re-listen to those, especially those last records, and everything changes. Every lyric that he wrote or every song that he picked that he didn't write all of a sudden made sense. And then if you listen to Hurt through the perspective of a broken man desperate for redemption, as a Christian, gosh, man, it was kind of life-changing for me. And then we made this amazing discovery of a story of him wandering into a cave, pretty much to die. That was his plan. He had no plans of coming out of that cave, and went in and, per his recollection, verbally heard God speak to him that I'm not done with you yet. And he came out of that cave a different man. And gosh, what a metaphor for all of us needing redemption.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the American recordings, because I remember hearing those recordings before I really knew about his faith journey, before I had read any biographies or autobiographies, before I knew about the story of the cave and him essentially giving up and being like, this is it, being at the end of his rope as, as a drug addict, as a derelict, just another superstar gone too soon was going to be his story. And so when you go back and specifically, I was going to bring up Hurt, but that's a Nine Inch Nails song, but nobody knows that, because even Trent Reznor, who wrote that song, said the moment Johnny Cash recorded it, it was no longer a Nine Inch Nails song, which to anyone that's heard either version, that's clearly and obviously true. But what they also don't know about Johnny Cash is that, him and June were both like ordained ministers towards the end of their life. Johnny Cash wrote a book called Man in White. I remember getting a used copy of it at Hastings in Lawton, Oklahoma a long time ago. And this was a novel that he wrote about the Apostle Paul, which again, it's a novel. It doesn't have to try to, be Bible or be scripture or be gospel. But from his deep understanding of the gospel stories, that's kind of where this came from. And also I remember talking to a guy that was part of the project where he recorded the New Testament, right? So whenever he recorded, the entire New Testament, they normally assume that people like him are going to want to record for 2, maybe 3 hours at a time and then kind of move on. And they said all the producers were there for 7, 8, 9 hours at a time. They would be there until the wee hours of the morning because Johnny just wanted to keep going. And it was because he was enjoying himself so much. It wasn't just that he had this, endless energy to him. But I feel like of all the stories that haven't been told about Johnny Cash, Ben, it's about redemption, but not just specifically redemption, but the redemption that he found in Christ. And, the documentary puts a fine point on that. So talk to me about really, because you could say redemption, right? I remember when Tiger Woods won his first major after basically getting bounced out of the sport for, all of his affairs and stuff like that. People were like, redemption. I'm like, nah, redemption is a theological word. He wasn't redeemed. He won a golf tournament. It's not the same thing. So it just feels way different with John,
Yeah, that's remarkable. Like going back to the Steve McQueen, which was my first entry into documentaries, the exclamation mark on his redemption in that film to me was, he's a bad dude. He had broken a lot of people. He had, been married multiple times. He had hurt pretty much everybody that ever got close to him in his life. And Steve McQueen, in his months before he was dying, as part of his redemption process, spent weeks reaching out to every single person in his life that he felt like he had wronged at some point, and asked for forgiveness and apologized for the wrongs that he had done. And then took it a step further and explained why he was so passionate about reaching out to them and that God had done something in his life. To me, Johnny has numerous stories like that, including, reaching out to his ex-wife and apologizing for the things that he had done, the things he had said, the way he had treated her, rebuilt a lot of relationships with his kids that took a lot of hard work, and then became an ordained minister. And through that, restarted his ministry to prisoners, fellow addicts and broken people that desperately needed a new chance at life. And what you don't see in a lot of those performances in the prisons later in his life was that he preached the gospel.
Yeah.
He didn't just go in there and perform songs. Yeah, he did that. But when the cameras turned off, he sat there in front of them and told them his redemption story and what God had done in his life. And he was loud about the gospel all the way till the end. And whether it was in his music or in the way that he treated people, and gosh, I got to sit up with a lot of people, whether it's, some intern that worked with him for a summer or somebody he ran into at a grocery store or a restaurant. We got to sit and hear story after story after story of like, when you were in the presence of Johnny Cash, there was nobody else in the room, and you were one of the most important people in that moment in his life. And he lived and breathed the gospel in every situation that he could. And that's what I call redemption.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. And as you're describing him, Ben, it reminds me of someone that I know that's going through a little bit of a rough time right now, and that's Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty fame and things like that. The gospel just oozes out of that man. And he has so many stories that have not been told on television, that have not been told on the podcast, of just him sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with just random people. Like, people travel to West Monroe, Louisiana, because until recently, Phil Robertson would teach Sunday school every single Sunday, and whoever wanted to come could come. And, they would have people come from states away, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, potentially, just to hear the man talk about Sunday school. But guess what? Everything went back to not some obscure Greek phrase or something interesting about an Old Testament story. Not that those things are not important, but it was always about the gospel. It was about the redemption message of the propitiation of our sin debt at the cross of Jesus Christ. And so, I didn't get a chance to meet Johnny Cash, but I'm assuming Phil Robertson and Johnny would have got along well, because they were both morons and losers, and they'd be the first ones to admit that. And they've gone back to be fully redeemed. But now we need to get to today, because today, like you said earlier, you're about to go to a red carpet event for Homestead, which, again, guys, I said this in the introduction, this comes out this weekend in theaters. Okay. So go to the show notes. You can go to the website, get your tickets, check that out. So let's just fly over the series, and then we'll kind of get down into it, because I was able to actually watch it ahead of time, because I'm better than all of you guys listening to this right now. Just kidding. But I got to watch it. So I have some specific questions that will not give away any spoilers, but let's do a 30,000 foot view. What is this film about?
Well, Homestead is a unique spin on the end of the world. So much of the last decade of kind of end of the world post-apocalyptic films is either being zombies or, people vanishing and leaving their clothes behind. This is not that. This is kind of, it's not really based on anything in Revelations, maybe pre-tribulation, if at all. But the main story, the inciting incident is a bomb goes off in Los Angeles, and all of these people flee into the Colorado Rockies to a homestead that this millionaire has built for this exact moment. And so hundreds of people flee. They're pre-invited to the homestead as part of the Homestead Club, and they race there for protection and safety and resources. And they quickly realize that the people inside the gate are just as dangerous as the people outside the gate. And all of this drama and conflict starts to happen. And it's mainly built around the Homestead prepper who built the place. And actor Bailey Chase plays a guy named Jeff, who is a special forces soldier and only knows violence. That is the way that he's protected his family. That's the way he's protected the country. And he thinks that's the only way to protect the homestead going forward. And that is dramatically against the ideals of the more peaceful farmers, homesteaders that think that there's got to be a better way. So you take all of these ideas, all of these faith backgrounds, and you collide them into one place at the homestead, and it creates some really interesting drama that we explore in the film and in the series going forward.
So I want to talk about that cadence. Let's talk about that, because whenever I was watching the film, I remember hearing, because I had got some other emails from Angel Studios, that there was going to be a series, but I didn't know if they were connected or joined. But this is a film that serves as, the jump off point for a series. And so sometimes, people, you'll watch something like that and you'll be like, oh my gosh, there's so much left unsaid. Well, but yeah, that's kind of the point with this. But why do that? Why not just do, what everyone does, which is, all right, this is season 1. It'll release on this date, or we'll release an episode at a time for this many weeks.
Well, it's funny because we've already been able to pre-read some reviews that are coming out, and somebody missed the note about it being a kickoff for a series or a long pilot, because there's a lot of these reviews are like, there's so many unanswered questions. What were the filmmakers thinking? Well, the plan always was this was going to be a series. It's 11 books. It's based off a book series called the Black Autumn series. There's 11 books in the series. The first season is the first book. And so we went into it knowing that it was going to be serious. Well, then a SAG and union strike happened right in the midst of us getting ready to film. And at the time, SAG, which represents Screen Actors Guild, represents all of the good actors in the world, including Neil McDonough, Don, and Bailey Chase, who are the actors in the film, only was allowing movies to be made. That was their only exemption that they're making. Low budget films would be approved on the SAG exemption. So we were like, we want to make something. We have the money to make something. Angel's behind us. Let's go to these guys and let's see if they will give us an exemption for making a film instead of the series. So what we did is we took the first 2 episodes of the series, merged them into one long script, and that's what you see in theaters today. Now, as soon as the movie ends, there's a QR code that comes up, and if you scan it, then you can watch the next 2 episodes of the series. And guys, I'm going to tell you this right now. The movie's great. Super proud of it. The series, in my mind, blows the movie away. It allows us, because it's, now in series format, we go a lot deeper in the stories. The characters are already set up. The world's already built. So now we can sit in the world a little bit longer without having to invest, an hour setting up 28 different characters in the film. So I'm really, really excited for people to see this thing.
Hey guys, real quick. I know a lot of you guys are really doing everything you can to have a consistent workout routine, but the problem is you work out at a Globo gym. And so there's 17 guys on the bench that you need, and there's people doing bicep curls on the squat rack. And the biggest problem is not your schedule. It's actually where you're trying to get your work in. How about you guys stop making excuses and build yourself a home gym? And when you do, make sure you use Sorinex. So Sorinex is a family-owned and operated business that builds some of the most impressive workout facilities in the entire world. They built gyms for teams in the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, and even the UFC. They've also built gyms for some of the biggest and most successful collegiate and high school athletic programs in the country. But in addition to that, they make the highest quality home gym products that I've ever seen on the market. In my personal home gym, I have the Sorinex Outfitter Rack, the heavy version in military green. Also, I have some of their center mass bells. I've got their Nordic glute ham developer and their patented landmine attached to my rack. So guys, stop fighting the riffraff at your local gym or bench or squat rack or whatever. And if you're going to build out a home gym, you may as well get one that will last you and one that you could even pass down to your kids. Begin your build out by going to Sorinex.com. That is Sorinex.com, Sorinex.com. Take control of where and when you work out, Sorinex.com. Yeah, and you're putting this out with Angel Studios. It's already been mentioned several times in this podcast. So what was it like working with Angel? Because obviously Angel, most people are familiar with them because of The Chosen. The Chosen's no longer with Angel Studios, but they put out some other things, the Bonhoeffer film, and they've done some great works. What was it like working with them?
So the biggest frustration as a filmmaker is always having to work with a studio and executives, and they don't always know their audience. Well, the audience for Angel Studios is the members of what they call the Angel Guild. So they have hundreds of thousands of members on their streaming platform, and they get to vote on the content that gets to be approved. It's not 6 guys in suits sitting at a boardroom voting on what they're going to make or what they're not going to make. So what we ended up doing almost 2 years ago is we created a proof of concept. It was 7.5 minutes. It's actually the beginning of the film that you got to see. And we presented that to the Guild and to Angel Studios, and we got approved. And not only did we get approved, they did a crowdfund and raised $1.5 million that ended up going towards the budget of the movie. to get the series off the ground. And so working with them is been a beautiful thing because they're a distributor. They have an audience, they have a built-in audience, and the audience keeps us accountable to making sure that what we're creating is amplifying light. And at the end of the day, we answer to hundreds of thousands of people that we wanted to invite into the process in many ways, and be a part of the marketing of the film and seeing the film in theaters. And so we're not, answering or meeting with some executive suit in Hollywood. We're literally, our boss is the masses. Our boss is the people. And that's been really, really fun. And honestly, it's allowed us a lot of flexibility in the creative process to do things that otherwise through the studio system would be impossible. And honestly, I don't think Homestead would exist if it wasn't for the way that Angel Studios is doing things.
One, Angel Studios seems to be on the cutting edge on a lot of these things. You even think recently, look at the last election we had in America and the all-time low faith in the mainstream media and their narratives and newspapers and things like that. But it was alternative media like podcasts and, the streaming platforms that you have to pay for that people were flocking to get their information, their unbiased information, their long-form information. And so it looks like the media landscape and the entertainment landscape is certainly changing, which actually relates to the first thing that's said in the film. I actually want to read the very first thing that is said. It's one of the main characters that everybody gets to know, does a voiceover at the beginning of the film, and it says, "Technology has become our God, and we worshipped at the altar of convenience and ease." So what's interesting about that phrase is it didn't say we worship. It says we worshipped at the altar of convenience and ease. And so it's providing some foreshadowing as to what we're about to see there in the beginning of the film. But I think most people, even if you are addicted to your phone, you realize that, yes, you like the fact that you can go to your phone and 30 seconds later, you have food on its way to you. You don't even have to put pants on anymore. You can just live your entire life in this box, and COVID taught us that and all those different things. And obviously that is a through point of some of the narratives and some of the things that you're exploring in the human condition throughout the film. But why start there? It doesn't seem accidental to me.
Yeah, it's funny because I've seen this movie at this point hundreds of times. So I actually forgot that line is is that early in the first few minutes. The character, it's a voiceover that you're referencing, and the character that's reading that is reading it after the world has collapsed. And so she's looking back at what we came from. Look, I am a man that's full of technology. Like if you looked around me right now, I have multiple computers in front of me. I have 2 cell phones. I got my AirPods in my ears. I got an expensive laptop right in front of me. But I had a unique experience this summer. My son's turning 13, and we did a Becoming a Man trip to Alaska. And for 2 weeks, I had 0 cell service. No connection to the outside world. It's just me and my son and God's creation. And guys, talk about a life-changing moment, not only for him, but for me. That is such a rarity in this world. And one of the really interesting conversations that we have, and that we kind of take the viewer through on the film, is all of these things that we need for comfort and our ease. What happens when you take all that away? If you removed everything that we rely on to make it through the day, that we not only expect, but we need for our own happiness. What if all that's taken away and it actually makes you a better person? What if embracing the simple things, the foundation of what made this country great, and connecting more with your family and your community and growing plants and understanding God's creation and animals? When you take everything away, that's the reality, is you're going to have to lean more into the way that I believe God probably intended us to live, more connected to his creation. And so I think the writers really wanted to make sure that we made that statement all the way in the front side of it. I mean, honestly, we've used it in trailers. We used it in the proof of concept. People seem to really, really connect to this idea of technology has become our God. And in so many ways, we are worshiping it. Even me, a Christian, almost my entire life, and pursuing God daily. I'm also pursuing technology and my phone. And there's something about, opening it up and feeling interconnected to people, but it's fake. It's a majority of that is fake. And you take it all away. And I'm telling you, what I experienced this summer in Alaska was a beautiful thing that if, God forbid, something tragic did happen and we lose all of that technology and we lose electricity and running water, I think there would be a lot of people that come out the other side going, I don't want to go back to the old ways. This is a beautiful tragedy.
And that's something that you explore within Homestead, certainly within the film that I watched. But there are many themes that are explored, or at least set up in the film. And one of those, I guess you could say, is the line and the ever thinning line between being prepared and being paranoid. Because I know people that are both. I know people that are pretty well prepared. You can't be prepared for all situations, right? But I know some people that are pretty well prepared, and I'm okay with those things. And then there are people that are flat out paranoid. And I'm like, I'm wondering where you're storing up your treasure, because then there are people that are not even taking their faith or their pursuit of God seriously, but they're digging trenches and putting up barbed wire in the edges of their property and, getting their latest, they're just setting up all these different things. And it's like, guys, even if you're the best of all chimps, you're still going to die. And all you've done is collected all this stuff for the next chimp, right? That's going to find your spot. And so it's like you're spending all this time worried about this world and none on the next world, and none on, cultivating a good relationship with your wife and catechizing your children and bringing them up in the worship and the admonition of the Lord and all those different things. Like, gosh, where are we spending all of our time? And so where is the series going to go as it pertains to that line? Because you can feel the tension between some of the characters in the film of that line between prepared and paranoid.
Yeah, gosh, this is probably my 10th or 11th interview, Kyle. And that is by far the best question I've gotten so far. So congratulations.
Let's go, guys. Gold medal.
Yeah, I wish I had a more of a moment to ponder that, but let me give you my gut instinct, and then I'll tell you where we go a little bit in the series without giving too much away. Not living in fear is one of the consistent themes of the Bible, right? And so, yeah, it's really unique when you see these hardcore preppers, and I know a lot of them, and I've met even more through the process of making the film. World ends, I'm going to be at their place. I'm going to be running and knocking on their gate, begging for them to let me in. And so, yeah, where is the balance between not living in fear and being prepared for the worst? And the reality is when I talk to a lot of these preppers, the first thing they say is, I don't live in fear because I am prepared. And taking it even a step further, the Homestead where we filmed the film is a real prepper's dream. I mean, it's fortified, is 1 million rounds of ammunition. A lot of the things that we say in the movie actually exist at the Homestead. And this gentleman, I asked him, pretty much posed the same question that you just posed to me. And he said, hey, this is not just to protect me and my family. I want all of this stuff so I can protect my neighbor and I can love on my community. And the plan is, it's not just him and his, beautiful kids and wife holed up in this mansion if all things fall apart. He is inviting hundreds of his closest friends, relatives, people that add value, doctors, nurses, special force soldiers, to come to the Homestead to build a community, to protect each other. And he doesn't look at it as a selfish thing. He looks at it as a beautiful way of taking care of the people that he loves and that he holds dear. So, there's definitely a balancing act there. As we get into the series, it's definitely explored more. There's a lot of haves and have-nots. There's a lot of characters within the Homestead that want to take care of more and more of the people outside. But then what's the consequences there, right? So think about it from our perspective. We're called to love our neighbor. But if your neighbor is sick, or if your neighbor is going to require eating up a lot of your resources, how do you do that? It's easy to be kind and gracious when we have plenty, which we do right now. If you take all that away, all of a sudden, a neighbor that you met at a party a few weeks ago, or in the circumstance of the film, they helped the homeless together. Now he's desperate. His family's desperate. He's at the gate. What do you do? in that scenario. And so I think these kind of questions, we don't have all the answers, Kyle. And I don't know if we'll know a lot of the answers of these life's biggest questions until we're faced with the situation or on the other side of heaven. But we pose a lot of these questions, and I think it's going to lead to a lot of really interesting conversation, just like you and I are having right now.
I mean, you guys made us feel the tension of that moment, specifically the moment you described at the gate of the Homestead. And I remember even having these discussions in my MBA program where it was just after a hurricane, and there were guys like in Ohio that, filled up U-Hauls full of generators and things like that. And they drove down to Louisiana and they were selling them at a premium. And the class was literally split. Half the class was like, that's horrible. That person should be in prison. Like, that's the worst thing ever. And then there was the other half, which was like me, which was like, look, that generator is a luxury item. It's like, it wasn't 2 degrees outside. Like it was 70 degrees and sunny. Like, I mean, this was not like they needed that generator. And so, but again, I could see the argument of both sides, but y'all did make us feel that tension. But also there's a tension that is created, which again, I was glad to know that it doesn't just stop at the film. It continues on to a series because there's a bunch of different kinds of characters. So you have the super intense, former spec ops military guy that's long on survival, instincts and skill, but short on compassion. You have the rich prepper guy that has a lot of resources, but perhaps, doesn't have the mindset that survival requires at all times. You got the rich prepper's wife who has a big heart, but is pretty naive. You have the desperate father that's obviously loving of his family, but it isn't prepared for the worst of worst situations. Then you got the doofy father who seems more concerned about entertaining himself than taking care of his family. So you have all these guys that you could either see yourself in or see yourself hating if you were in that situation. And so I guess, is that what the series is going to do? Is it's going to lead us to some conclusion on all these types of people? Is it going to try to moralize to us about who the good ones are and who the good ones are not? Like, where is this going to go?
Yeah, that's not our responsibility in terms of, answering all the questions. I think as filmmakers, the most interesting films that I've ever watched, they pose really great, deep life questions. But they don't give you the answers, right? What I love about the series is I'm an outsider, born and raised in Australia. I lived there till the 90s and then moved here, been here for almost 30 years. And hopefully you can still hear a little bit of my accent, but it's fading.
It's still there. It's on the ends of your sentences when you get a little lazy.
Okay. Lazy. That's good. I'll try to be more lazy. I want to retain it as much as I can. So from an outsider's perspective, America's in a moment unlike anything probably since the Civil War. I mean, United is literally in the title of our country, a great country. And I'm a citizen here now, so I can celebrate. It's truly a land of opportunity. It's given me and my family everything we could want and imagine and more. But the country is divided. You look at the recent election. You look at threats from other countries, whether it's what's going on in the Middle East or Russia. We are heading into a period of time unlike no other. And what I love about Homestead is talk about where we are as a society of hundreds of people from different backgrounds, different ideals. Violence is the only way to peace is the only way, all colliding in a place together and trying to figure out how to celebrate our similarities instead of our differences. That's the story going forward. We don't answer all the questions. There's a faith element that's pretty subtle in the movie that gets pretty loud as we get further and further into it. And I'm really excited about it because to me, Kyle, the most interesting art, I mean, Jesus told parables that were abstract and metaphorical, and some of them were hard to interpret, and you have to really dive in them to understand what he's trying to say. What's the modern day version of that? And there's a lot of those elements within the series that I think the audience is going to love, whether they're inside the church or outside. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity for people that would never step foot in church to sit and watch this series and be impacted by the questions that we're posing that allow them to have conversations with their Christian friend or allow them to have conversations with their atheist friend. We have an atheist that shows up in the series. and she is rocked by what she's experiencing. And through that lens of her atheism is able to ask life's biggest questions. And I can't wait for people to see and meet her, because it's really, really powerful stuff.
Well, Ben, I was going to ask you about the faith element. So obviously there is a faith element in the film. It's very interesting to hear you say that it's going to be basically non-subtle as we move along. But I find it interesting, even as you talk about the atheist character, when situations get dire, atheists tend to have their non-faith shaken because they're like, wait a minute, maybe I'm not just a highly evolved chimp that learned language and wears pants. Okay. And then you have people of faith that have their faith shaken, and then they're like, oh my gosh, I think I still believe in God, but do I still believe that he's good? And so it's like, no matter which side of the ledger you're on, it's the dire situation that becomes the problem. Because again, when things are air conditioned and completely controlled and super convenient, you don't have to wrestle with give us this day our daily bread. But if you're literally in that position, it becomes a major issue. So talk a little bit more about the faith element and how Homestead's going to deal with that.
Wow. I loved what you said there. When you're on the precipice of life and death, it doesn't matter where you're from or what your upbringing is, or whether you're rich or poor.
That's right.
Whether you're prepared or not. Those life and death questions all of a sudden become incredibly important. And gosh, what an organic way to have those conversations, by setting up a world where at any moment, any day, death is right around the corner. And we do that. We do that in the movie fairly subtly, and then in the series, as we get into it, I can think of a scene in episode 2 where, again, it's the atheist questioning her belief or unbelief in a world of pain and death and sickness. She sees God's hand moving in ways that are unexplainable to her. And the exact opposite of that, you have Jenna, who is the Homestead owner's wife, who built the prepper fortress, if you will. She's constantly questioning, where is God in all of this? The God that she has served her entire life, now she's witnessing such despair and sadness and death. Where is he in all of that? I don't want to give away too much. I've already risked a few things going forward, but know that it's a looming conversation, and it's an organic conversation. It doesn't feel forced. So much faith-based content on the film side, a lot of the faith messaging feels forced because the people aren't in life and death situations where they're asking these questions, and because it's an end times thriller. I'm telling you, if it was a real situation, a lot of people are going to be coming to you and I and trying to ask those questions about what we believe and why we believe it. Because in those moments where you take away all the comforts and ease of life, it opens up an opportunity for God to move in ways that are unexplainable other than the miraculous. And we see that in the film.
Yeah. And Ben, I would say that even in addition to that, a lot of people say, hey, that Christian film was corny. They're not actually communicating that as corny. They're communicating that it felt inauthentic, right? And we live in an era where if we can smell inauthenticity like you're covered in diarrhea. Or at least I feel like the people that I'm around can. It's just you reek of this is fake. You're fake. You don't mean what you're saying. And that's doubly worse if you are claiming faith, and not just faith, but exclusive faith. Not like, hey, I have faith and I can just add it to whatever faith you have. That's not real. But if you say, no, Jesus is the only way to God, but then also you have this inauthentic message, that's a really bad idea. And so for me, I think it's because it is forced. You use the word forced. And when you force it, you've got to wrap this thing up in 95 to 120 minutes. And, if the person doesn't get the girl in the end, and if the business doesn't actually work out, then we don't want to watch that film because it makes us sad. It gives us the sads on the way out the door. And I just don't feel like we're getting that with Homestead. There were always some things in the first couple hours, right, with the film where I was like, all right, well, they're burning the ships on this one. Let's go. So I like that you guys don't seem to be playing it safe. And I'm happy to know that it gets more intense, but I will leave my questions about Homestead there so that we don't get into into spoiler land. So I know you got a red carpet to go to, and I want to leave some meat on the bone for guys to go to the website and pick up their own tickets. Last question I'll ask you today, Ben, is what's next? Like I know if Homestead takes off, there's going to be multiple seasons and all that. Know something you haven't told anybody. Okay. I want to know, like, there's a project, because I know you got one, Ben. There's a project in the back of your head right now where you're just like, man, if this Homestead thing absolutely takes off, and if I get to take a risk in a studio or Angels, like, all right, well, we'll give you a little bit of rope on this one, Ben, because you hit such a good home run. What's that project where you're like, that's the one I want to work on?
So there's two. One that I can talk about.
Okay.
In 2019, we developed a film called Drummer Boy. When I say we, me and my brothers wrote a script. It's set during the Civil War. It follows two brothers that get separated on the opposite sides of the battlefield and their journey back to each other. Well, in 2020, the world blew up, and not only did it blow up because of COVID, there was a lot of racial issues. Gone with the Wind got pulled off of Netflix. There was a lot of Civil War statues in southern cities that got torn down, Confederate statues. And the big studio that was initially behind it got a little nervous. And so we paused it, put it on hold. And I'm telling you, it's the best script I've ever written. It's a musical, which a lot of people don't like musicals, including me. But guys, it is the best music that my brothers have ever made, set to an incredible story. And we were this close to filming it in Romania and then throughout the South. And then again, the world blew up. So, when I hear you, asking your question, what's anything that I would love if any studio jumped at the idea of like, hey, what's your dream and passion here? It would be that project. It would get me back working with my brothers. We've worked together on and off for decades and always love working with them. And the hope would be that is looming in 2025 or 2026, sometime in the next 2 years. But yeah, you're right. If the movie does well in theaters, and the episodes that we've already shot release and people respond to it, the next year most likely will be eaten up entirely with Homestead. And, I'd love that too.
Okay, very good. Well, Ben, we've been able to weave in and out of some good stuff here. I've really enjoyed our time together, but that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, guys, outside of the theatrical release, December 20th, it's a big deal. I know people overstate it all the time. It's not overstated. The weekend of release for a film is absolutely pivotal for more projects like this. And if it doesn't do well, I'm telling you, nobody will try an end times thriller anytime soon in the faith-based world, at least for years to come. So coming out as in droves and supporting the film will allow us to make more of the series and more projects like that. And I do think that, Christians oftentimes create art the way we wish the world was and not the way the world really is. And this kind of, PG-13, a little more gritty, a little more dark content has oftentimes within the faith space been avoided. And so if people don't come out and see this, we'll be back to, prettier, easier stories. And so my hope is, rally the troops. Let's get out there and support this thing. And hopefully we can continue the story down the road.
Yeah, I echo that. It was the same pitch with Bonhoeffer. It's like, guys, I'm drawn to things that are more dark. I don't want the happy ending. I want people to end bloody somehow. And so, I'm drawn to the things where it's not just so cute and neat and tidy. And guys, you have to vote with your dollars. It's not just your attention. It's also with your dollars. Guys, it is in the show notes. Check it out. Ben, best of luck. We'll talk again soon.
Hey, thank you. Great to chat, Kyle.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Ben Smallbone. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. The only link I've got for you today is a link to where you can go and check out showtimes in your area for Homestead. Guys, check it out this weekend. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.